Good morning, Year 5, and welcome to this week's English. This week, we're going to look at something totally different. We've spent 2 weeks looking at instructions, but this week we're going to look at poetry. So, what is poetry? Lots of people have different ideas. Some people hear the word poetry and they're like, oh, it's boring. Some people get very excited by it, and I think you should get very excited about it because poetry is all around us. So I'm just going to show you a clip so you can see what some children think poetry is about.
A poem is. Poems are amazing. What is a poem? It's a story, but it's in a song. I don't know why they would call it a song or something like that, but I'm okay with poems. It makes me laugh. It's better than a story. When they're happy poems, I become happy. I really, really love poetry. Let's read some poems. Excellent.
Hopefully you enjoyed that clip and you agreed with maybe some of their views about poetry. And poetry is with us every single day. Baby, you're a firework. He sings, "Baby, you're a firework." That's a metaphor. And in Pocahontas, when it says steady as the beating drum, it's a simile. So simile and metaphors are there in many songs and in many movies. But there are other ways that we can see poetry in everyday life. Even my shopping list sometimes reads a little bit like a poem. A bunch of fresh coriander, half a kilogram of sugar, a bunch of grapes, 1 dozen free-range eggs, fruit yogurt. Sounds quite poetic, I think, don't you? But this week, we're going to study the work of a significant poet, find out about his style, and gather ideas for writing our own space-inspired poem at the end of the week. So do you remember the Iron Man? Can you remember who wrote it? Yes, it was Ted Hughes. And Ted Hughes, as I think I told you at the time, was originally a poet. He wrote for adults and children, and we could clearly see this when we read his book, The Iron Man. We spent a lot of time looking at the language. So, can you remember what poetic devices Ted Hughes used? Let's have a little look at this extract from The Iron Man. The Iron Man came to the top of the cliff. How far had he walked? Nobody knows. Where had he come from? Nobody knows. How was he made? Nobody knows. Taller than a house, the Iron Man stood at the top of the cliff, on the very brink in the darkness. The wind sang through his iron fingers. His great iron head, shaped like a dustbin but as big as a bedroom, slowly turned to the right, slowly turned to the left. His iron ears turned this way, that way. He was hearing the sea. His eyes, like headlamps, glowed white, then red, then infrared, searching the sea. Never before had the Iron Man seen the sea. He swayed in the strong wind that pressed against his back. He swayed forward on the brink of the high cliff, and his right foot, his enormous iron right foot, lifted up, out into space, and the Iron Man stepped forward off the cliff into nothingness. Crash! Down the cliff the Iron Man came toppling head over heels. Crash, 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 from rock to rock, snag to snag, tumbling slowly. And as he crashed, and crashed, and crashed, his iron legs fell off. His iron arms broke off, and the hands broke off the arms. His great iron ears fell off, and his eyes fell out. His great iron head fell off. All the separate pieces tumbled, scattered, crashing, bumping, clanging down onto the rocky beach far below. A few rocks tumbled with him, then silence. Only the sound of the sea chewing away at the edge of the rocky beach where the bits and pieces of the Iron Man lay scattered far and wide, silent and unmoving. Now pause the video, get yourself a piece of paper and jot down any of the poetic devices that you've spotted. You're looking for things like repetition and simile, and what else can you remember and think of? Pause the video and have a go. Welcome back. Did you get any of these? If you notice here, nobody knows. Where did he come from? Nobody knows. We've got some repetition here. And then further down into this bit, we've got some personification. The wind sang. You know the wind didn't really sing, but it's almost like it does. So that's our personification. The wind's got like a human quality. And then we've got some similes. His great iron head shaped like a dustbin, but as big as a bedroom. Okay. And then over on this side, we've got onomatopoeia and repetition because we've got crash, crash, crash. Remember, onomatopoeia is when a word sounds like, or it's written like it sounds. So, wonder how you got on. Now, whenever we read or hear new poems, quite tricky to think about what we want to think about them. So we've come up with this little way of looking at poems and studying them, which has got an order and a format to it, which makes it a lot easier for you. And it's called Smiled. So what you have to do is first of all look at the structure of the poem, the way it's arranged or laid out. And then you need to think about the meaning of the poem. What do you think it's about? And then the imagery, what pictures does it create in your mind? And then the language, what vocab brings the poet's ideas to life? And then you need to think about its effect on you. And this will be different for everybody. How does it make you feel? And then what devices has the poet used? Simile, metaphor, repetition, and onomatopoeia. So this is our way of looking at any new poem that we meet. So let's have a look in a bit more detail. So the structure is the way the poem is arranged or laid out. So, for example, you've probably come across shape poems and maybe acrostics, haikus, kennings, or freeform poems. It can also refer to the rhyming pattern and the rhythm in the poem. Meaning. What's the poem trying to tell you? Is it a story? What's it about? Is there a message? Does it describe a place, a person, an event, or a feeling? And then imagery. What images does the poem create in your head? Does it form a picture of something in your mind or make you think about something? And then language. What vocabulary does the poet use to bring his ideas to life? Has the poem got powerful verbs, amazing adjectives, or astounding adverbs? And then what effect does it have on you? Does it make you feel happy or angry or miserable or uneasy? Might be different for different people because we all have different effects of poems on us. And then finally, the devices. What poetic devices, features has the poet used? There's a list here: simile, metaphor, alliteration, repetition, onomatopoeia. You've also got personification and lots of other ones as well. So you are going to have your own copy of a Smiles planner for the week. And on it, you're going to collect all of your ideas, okay, about the poems. And we're going to keep adding to it. So I've put here the Smiled acronym. So anything to do with that structure of a poem goes here, meaning goes here, imagery, language, effect, and devices. And then I've pulled out a bit more about the devices. So what similes? Can you put some good ones in here? Good examples of metaphors here: personification, alliteration, onomatopoeia, and repetition. Remember, similes is when you say something is like or as something. Metaphor is when you say something actually is that something. Personification is when you give an object a human quality, such as the wind sang. Alliteration is when the initial sounds of the describing word and the noun are the same. And onomatopoeia is a sound word like crash or bang. And then repetition is when a word gets repeated, or a phrase, like with more than one word. Now I want you to have a look at this poem by Ted Hughes. It's called The Warm and the Cold. Freezing dusk is closing like a slow trap of steel on trees and roads and hills and all that can no longer feel. But the carp is in its depth like a planet in its heaven, and the badger in its bedding like a loaf in the oven, and the butterfly in its mummy like a vial in its case, and the owl in its feathers like a doll in its lace. Freezing dusk has tightened like a nut screwed tight on the starry aeroplane of the soaring night. But the trout is in its hole like a chuckle in a sleeper. The hare strays down the highway, like a root going deeper. The snail is dry in the outhouse, like a seed in a sunflower. The owl is pale on the gatepost, like a clock on its tower. Moonlight freezes the shaggy world like a mammoth of ice. The past and the future are the jaws of a steel vice. But the cod is in the riptide, like a key in a purse. The deer are on the bare-blown hill, like smiles on a nurse. Now, let's have a little think about this poem. I want you to think about, do you understand the poem? Are there any words that you don't understand? Make a list. I'm going to have a little look through now with you. Does everybody know what a carp is? A carp is like a big goldfish. Okay. And a viol is an instrument, a bit that's an old-fashioned, like a violin. Okay. And what else might you not know? A nut. Okay. That's where you've got like a nut and a bolt. Soaring, okay, is when something's going up high into the sky. And a chuckle is like a laugh. And a sleeper is just somebody that's sleeping in this poem. And an outhouse, well, that's just a building that's outside, or a shed or something that's outside your main house. And I think you know what a mammoth is. An old woolly elephant. You've probably seen the movie Ice Age. And most of the rest I think you should know. Then I want you to have a look to see, do you think the poem rhymes? And how does it rhyme? Where does it rhyme? Is it every line? I can see one here. I've got like a slow trap of steel. And then the next line doesn't rhyme with it, but the next one, feel. So I've got steel and feel. Have a look through the rest of the poem. Does it rhyme like that? Missing out a line in between? Then I want you to have a look. Are there any similes or metaphors? Well, I've got a word here that gives a clue. Like a slow trap of steel. So it's talking about freezing dusk. So it's obviously winter time. And at night, as the light fades and dusk creeps upon us, it becomes very, very cold. And it describes it here like a slow trap of steel. So you're caught in a trap. Okay, if you imagine a metal trap to catch animals. Okay, so it's a slow trap closing in, okay, on us like a slow trap of steel. And here we've got, but the carp is in its depth. So this fish, right, is in the deep waters, and it's like a planet in its heaven. It's got so much space and it's spread out. And then we've got, and the badger in its bedding. You can imagine a badger, okay, fast asleep in its warm bedding. It's all cozy, and if you think like a loaf in the oven, okay, when it's starting to rise and it's proving and it's all warm. So I want you to have a look through the rest of the poem and see what you can pick out, similes and metaphors and the meaning of the poem. And then I want you to think about, what structure do you think the poem has? How's it organised? Does it rhyme? And if so, which lines rhyme? Is it every line or every other line? And then what do you think the meaning of the poem is? And what imagery does it create in your mind? What pictures? And then I want you to choose some language that you think is powerful. And then I want you to tell me what effect the poem has of you as a reader. What does it make you think of? And finally, what devices do you notice? Do you have a favourite simile in there? I think mine might be like the loaf in the oven, the idea of the badger in its bedding. And you're going to put this on your planner here. So the structure you're going to talk about here, the meaning here, imagery, language, effect, and devices. And then here, an example of any similes you can find, metaphors, personification, alliteration, onomatopoeia, and repetition. You might not be able to find all of them, but if you can find an example of any of them, or a couple of good ones, then pop them in. And keep this safe, and then tomorrow we're going to go through them together in the Zoom call. Okay, that's it for now. I hope you enjoy looking through the poem, and Mrs. Roberts and Miss Bridges and myself are really excited to share your ideas with you tomorrow on the Zoom call. Take care. Bye.